Mija, let me tell you. Again, I'm Ana Rosa, and that's Diana. Uh, and first of all, we wanted to thank everyone for everyone's interest in our podcasts. We are very grateful for everyone's feedback and interest. We are really excited to get on this journey with you guys. I know everyone has been really thoughtful in their messages.
I just wanted to say thank you. We feel the love and we feel the community forming. We appreciate the feedback, as my coma said. We really feel embraced by the community and part of the community. So thank you so much.
Yes, and we're looking forward to growing the community and putting out more episodes. We have our blankets, we have our water, and we're here to just platicar and have a conversation.
Fluya la plática.
Que fluya, que fluya. And I know I've been talking to people about like what they would like to see in our podcast. And one of my friends from grad school, we were talking, and I think it'd be really cool to kind of in the future bring other people of color who are first generation immigrants as well, and kind of hear their perspective. So maybe that's something we can do in the future. So we would love to hear more ideas like that. But yeah, shout out to Allison Wu.
Shout out.
And then we can briefly talk about kind of where the name came from. I know a couple of people have been asking where the name came from. And in Mexico, just to give you all of a quick background, when Mija, which is in our title, Mija, let me tell you, Mija, I did a Google search just to see what Mija translates to in English, and it translates to darling. So it's kind of a term of endearment, and I can quickly go over kind of what it means to me, and then Coma, you can kind of say like what Mija means to you. But to me, it's usually an older woman or older generation that will say it to the younger girls. And for me, like Mija is what my grandma would, say to me, or even my mom will say to us. And for me, it kind of is like inviting and kind of warm and cozy and kind of makes me feel like home. And I think we wanted to include that into this podcast. We want you to feel at home, and we want it to be inviting for you all.
For me, Mija, it also reminds me of my grandma, my mother, kind of the embrace. It also, to me, even though it sounds like if it's the shortened version of mi hija, Mija, kind of like a short version of it, kind of that embrace, the motherly embrace. And for me, it's just very nurturing. And that's a feeling that we want to create in this podcast, the nurturing environment where people feel part of the community.
Definitely. We want it to feel kind of like a warm hug kind of thing, And then the let me tell you is just like, hey, let's talk about it. Let's talk about these stories, these experiences together, for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like, let me tell you, like I'm excited to share something with you. Let me tell you what's going on in my life. Let me tell you what I've learned. It's very inviting.
Definitely. And then I guess we can get started with the topic of the day. I'll let you kind of spearhead it, Coma.
Yeah, so today's topic, is about setting the theme of where we come from. We mentioned in our introduction, we come from a small town called Los Guerrero in Jalisco, Mexico. And we heard about Ana being, how old were you when we moved to the United States, Ana?
I think I was around 3 when we came to the U.S.
I was about 8. So we wanted to set the theme of like, what was our life like before coming to the United States, and what decisions made it happened, what the process was. So I guess we can begin with the part that I remember. I recall a story. So I'll start there, and then we'll see where that takes us. I remember my mom's a great cook. She even has her YouTube channel. Shout out to my mom's channel. ¿Cómo se llama el canal, Ana?
Cocinando con Rosa. So we'll maybe add the link at one of our maybe Facebook posts or something. So shout out to my mama. Amazing cook, amazing recipes.
For sure. That's the thing I missed when I went off to college, her cooking. So just to go back to the topic of today, which is speaking about that one story that comes to mind. And this is what, just to set the scenery, my father came to the United States when he was about 16. And my mom got married with my father when he was 25 and my mom was 17, or 16, almost 17. And so my dad once they got married, my dad would come and go. He was a seasonal worker, so he would spend 6 months of his year in the United States and 6 months of the year and go back to Los Guerrero. And so my mom had me and my brother and my sister Ana and Dulce, which at that time. And I remember we loved las tortillas de harina from Mexico. If anyone's from Jalisco or San Martín de Hidalgo, they know that there's a little quaint shop ahí en el mercado that we love those tortillas. Those tortillas are like hot when they come out, and they even give you one to taste. So shout out to las personas de San Martín que hacen las tortillas. Hay historia, ¿verdad? And the historia begins with, when you're a child, you hear conversations of adults, and you are kind of part of those conversations, but not directly. And I remember that my mom and my dad and, los papeles, los papeles nos van a llegar muy pronto porque ya tienen años metidos, ¿verdad? Entonces, I remember that we wanted to have some burritos. And again, my mom's an awesome cook, and she's like, well, yo les hago burritos, but you have to go get to the store and get the tortilla. And so if you're from Los Guerrero, and surrounding ranchos and pueblitos around, that you don't go to a supermarket. You go to a local person's business. There's tienditas, right? In different parts of the town, strategically placed to serve a certain neighborhood. And so I remember my mom, sent myself, and I think it was my brother too, al mandado, because you went to el mandado when you were like really young. And that was the thing, that in los pueblitos, you went very young to run errands, te lo apuntaban ahí para que no se te olvidara en un pedacito de papel, and you would just go off and to the store, right? So we went to the store of this señora called Maria. I don't recall the other parts, but Maria, and we didn't have, and we still don't have, a post office in our town. So
and come on, real quick, just the population of Los Guerrero, what would you say is kind of maybe like 600 people? There's no stoplights, dirt and rock roads, like there's no pavement or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Everyone knows each other.
Yes, everybody knows each other. And if they don't know you, they'll ask who you belong to. ¿De quién eres hija? You know what I mean? They will ask you, ¿de quién eres hija? And they'll find out because you kind of tell them like your lineage, your family tree. Soy hija de Gaby, de Rosa. Oh, ¿cuál Gaby? ¿Cuál Rosa? Pues el hijo de ¿verdad? José, we call them Mama Chuy, ¿verdad? Rosa, hija de quién? De Antonio y de Engracia. Oh, and then they kind of connected the family tree, Yeah,
so, they connect who your grandparents are, they connect who your aunts and uncles are, and who your parents are, and they kind of create a picture from that. Very true.
Yeah, so that's, and that is exactly what happened. That day, we went to la tiendita de la señora Maria, and that was on the main street. And so we went to the tiendita, and like I said, there's no post office either. And so the people would have that service in la tiendita. So they would sell the regular groceries, and then they would have, um, written on a board or like a chalkboard, like names of people who had received some correspondence.
Mm-hmm.
And so we walk in, and of course, oh, mija, ¿eres hija de Rosa? Sí. I responded, sí, and she said, well, she showed me a white envelope it was very different because usually, like, our mail used to be a little cartita, las pintitas. They would call them las pintitas because it had like little stripes at the top and around. I think they were like red and green. And those were kind of the letters I was used to seeing.
Mm-hmm.
But this envelope was different. It was a big white envelope with a kind of like a, when you get an envelope and it has the little plastic that shows like an address.
The little window. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the little window. Well, the lady showed me a big sobre, right? A big sobre. It says, dile a tu mamá, tell your mom que recibió este correo, ¿verdad? Esta carta. This is a big sobre, and in my mind, as a young child, I think, ya nos llegaron los papeles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. I ran to my mom.
You were thinking like, oh, the papers are here. Like we can
go to El Norte.
Yeah.
And right, and what we
US?
called El Norte was the U.S. El Norte.
Mm-hmm.
Right, not the north of Mexico, but El Norte, like crossing the border, right? So in my mind, I was thinking, officially, ya nos llegaron los papeles. Like magically, right? You get a letter and they come in the mail. So that was my thinking. I was about maybe like 7 years old when that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so my mom was like, she received the letter, she went personally. Of course, they didn't give it to me. I was too young. But the lady went to the tiendita and she picked up her mail. And it was in English. And so my parents didn't speak English, but there were some people in town lived partially their life in the U.S., and they had learned the language. And so this is where the community comes along, right? This person who people entrusted to go and show their documents, very private, right, information for that purpose. Can we give a shout out to them?
Yeah.
I would like to give a shout out because they were part of the journey. So her shout out to Aurora, la señora Lola Flores. And so she helped us. And I remember I went that day with my mom to her house, and she opened the envelope, and we found out that it was actually our appointment to go to Juarez. The appointments, or the Nacitas a Juarez, was the beginning of the process to start your legalization process, I guess. And that included a couple of trips to Juarez.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so when that happened, I remember my parents, once they took the trip to Juarez, they traveled by bus. And I remember staying back with my grandma, my brother, myself, and my sister. I think they took my dulce with them, but I think the oldest, we remained back. And so we stayed with my grandmother. And, it was very exciting and scary because my parents had never, like, both of them left us for more than a day. So that was kind of like exciting, but scary. It's exciting because they're going off and they're, starting this process that they've been waiting for a long time. But at the same time, it's like, my mom and dad are not here. Right. But we know there was a greater reason they weren't there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so between the first appointment and then the second appointment, that's when we all went. We were all required to go and present ourselves. I think they did physicals and we had to present, documentation. And so we traveled to Juarez. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember we went by bus, and that was the first official trip we took out of our small town.
Hmm.
It was about a day trip on bus, and we kept stopping in different towns. And for my small perception as a child, I was looking around in the different towns. And I remember we stopped at a restaurant, and they were selling burritos. So here I am thinking, los burritos are like the burritos in my hometown. Shout out to me,
Yeah.
Tio Tuy's burritos that we love.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that my mom make, right? But they were different. And I remember that's when I started to get a taste of getting out of like our small town. There's a world out there. There's places that have different types of food, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
getting a broader perspective of the world.
Right. And even within Mexico, it shows the
Mhm.
diversity in food that there exists, in different parts of Mexico. Hmm.
Yeah, it's very diverse. There's so much richness. We stayed in a hotel for the first time. Never in my 8 years or 7 years had I stayed in a hotel. So that was a different experience. And
Hmm.
we went to our appointment. They did all the things that they needed to do, and we were officially approved. And
Hmm.
so one of the things also that I remember on that trip was we had to cross the border for the first time and get our passport stamped. And so we crossed to El Paso, Texas, and it was a big, big kind of like building, like those buildings that have the official government buildings, that I never seen
Yeah.
in my life, obviously. But now
Hmm.
you see a glimpse of what El Norte is.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I remember going into that building, and the thing of everything that happened in that building, I remember I saw my first vending machine.
First vending machine.
Mhm. So remember, in our hometown, we had tienditas. There was an attendant. You would tell them what you needed, and they would give it to you. But now, crossing, over, you you have this machine that you put money into it. You push a few buttons, and ta-da! You get your treats, right? Chip,
Right.
cookies, whatever they had there. And I remember
Hmm.
my dad taught us how to use the vending machine.
Since he had been over here, huh?
Yes.
Memory.
And so that was mind blowing for us. We're like, what? You put money and then, automatically something comes out when you push certain buttons. We didn't know that you had to put like, the buttons there. We got the money part, but putting
Hmm.
the buttons and selecting your choice of snack, that was all
Hmm.
new to us. So those are kind of like the little things that I remember
Yeah.
based on, our beginning process
Hmm.
of getting those appointments, going to those appointments, and just like my perspective, what I saw and what was memorable to me at that time is just something that I will never forget.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think like for for a young girl like you, like your perspective and what you're focusing on is different than what like my mom and dad were probably focusing on, and Jose and I were focusing on. So it's always interesting to kind of step into your brain at that time and kind of like what were you experiencing at the time and this new life-changing event that was going to happen. My question for you is like, like what getting your papeles would entail, like what was going to lie ahead? Like, do you remember kind of like what that meant to you?
That's a great question. I definitely didn't realize the immensity of the change that would come with getting your papeles. I always envisioned El Norte being a lot of like because my mom had in her house a framed picture of some horses with a white fence, like the ones you see in the ranches,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of greenery. So that was kind of like my perception of El Norte. Oh, there's going to be a lot of like green fields, and a lot of fences, the white fences. And, for me, it was just kind of that vision because that's what I would see. Oh, this is El Norte. It's a picture of some of los caballos en El Norte. And so I envisioned that being El Norte, like white fences with horses and ranches. But it didn't really hit me at that time just because of my, the level of consciousness that I had about what that change would entail until it happened, right? But we know
Right.
we were excited. We were excited because we were finally going to be together. My dad would come back and forth, and we used to see him 6 months out of the year. And so that would
Mm-hmm.
mean for us, getting our papeles meant that our family was going to be finally together wherever we went into the United States. And I know that there was a lot of weight in getting more services for my sister, for Dulce, because my
Mm-hmm.
mom used to sacrifice so much to get her to services. Like in Mexico, they don't have the same type of embedded services in the schools to support students with special needs. So, my mom used to sometimes take a bus to San Martin where they used to have la escuelita, that they
Mm-hmm.
would help my sister. She would take the bus, and when she missed the bus, she would walk there, and she would walk with my sister. And San Martin is a walking distance. What would you say it is?
I want to say maybe like 30 to 45 minutes, if not an hour. Just a quick background. So Dulce is our sister. She is number 4 out of 5 of us, and she has Down syndrome. Shout out to Dulce. We love you.
Love you, Dulce.
hmm Maybe we'll have her on the podcast in a future episode, interviewing her. Hear stories of my mom saying, she had dulces in her brazos, in her arms. She would carry her daughter, very young. That was the early intervention services, is what we would call them here in the U.S. But in Mexico, they had an escuelita for kiddos with special needs, and my mom would carry her in her arms and walk if she missed the bus. And it seemed like it was like we said, a 45-minute walk one way, so almost like a 2 hour, almost a 2 hour round trip just to get my sister the services she needed. And I think that's why I think coming to the US meant a lot for my family as well. Like you mentioned, Coma, like just getting her those services that are more available here than they are, in a small community where we were living.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And also in our hometown, the schooling level just goes to 6th grade. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you do have la secundaria and la preparatoria, but that entails a cost.
Mm-hmm.
And as we had shared in our first episode, my parents attended up to 6th grade. And
Mm-hmm.
it was for different factors, right? The big families, not able to afford beyond that because of the cost that it entails. It entails going to another town over, buying your
Mm-hmm.
books or materials. And big families back in the day, it was hard for them. And so
Right.
for them, it was also an opportunity for their children to come and learn, a new language, but also to attend school and have different opportunities that they didn't have back at home.
Mm-hmm. Which came at a sacrifice, right? It came at that sacrifice of having to leave their families, their siblings, their parents behind, to give us more opportunities and more doors to open for us, for sure. And just quickly, too, I think also part of it is like, my dad and my mom come from bigger families, and 6th grade was kind of as far as you went, and then you would go and work and help your parents in the agriculture, because there is a lot of agriculture where in our little town. And I think, like, I know my dad made it to the 6th grade and then went on to help my grandpa in the fields or in the agriculture. And even from a very young age, I think the kiddos were out of a certain age, they were expected to contribute and work. I know my dad says like, oh, I've worked since I was, 7 or 8, like very young age. And then also people married very young, because I know Diana touched upon how my mom was 17 when she got married, and my dad, was 8 years older. For people who are from the US, that is like what, like she's very young, like almost
Underage.
illegal here, right? It was customary for if you didn't go on to get an education, you got married pretty young, because that's kind of what the next step was.
Yes, definitely. Small towns, that's kind of like your pathway was for some, right?
Hmm.
And to have children right away for some who are able to have children. And just to go back to the part where you said about my dad, I know he jokes around a little bit and he says, there were times where they would take him out from schooling, even before finishing sixth grade, for months at a time. And then he would say, pasé la escuela de panzazo, right? De panzazo, because, just imagine being absent for months at a time and going back and have lost, people were ahead, right? They already had their material learned, their timetable learned, and he's missed a gap. So it would take them a lot to catch up, if even they caught up, because they would then be taken out again, and they were just kind of playing a catch-up game, and so they learn basic stuff, like to survive, but they also learning experience in life, right? So they were learning in school the academic stuff, but in another hand, they were also learning how the work ethic, from their fathers. And I know we look at it like, oh, that's child labor, and what was going on. But, we got to put ourselves in the shoes of the people who were living in those times, and they were rough. And so that kind of prompted my dad to leave his hometown at the age of 16 to come and work in the United States, because things were rough. They were big families, and I know that's not fault of their own, right? They didn't decide to have big families, their parents decided, but that was kind of the costumbre. You had big families. And because they saw how rough things were for their mother, for their father, and their siblings, when they found the opportunity that someone who was already living in the United States called them, like, hey, I'm going to help you come over here, they took it. I can't imagine myself leaving alone, maybe having a sibling in the U.S. and leaving my house, leaving my country at 16 to go and work. But they did.
Big move. Yeah, like my dad came because one of his siblings had come. I know Minino Feyo, que en paz descanse, came before and kind of laid kind of a pathway, like had a job and was able to kind of call his brother and be like, hey, there's jobs over here. And that's how kind of my dad was able to come over and have a job available to him.
And I'm pretty sure that somebody supported my uncle, mi tío, in coming here. So there was this kind of cadenita. And people started arriving, and the reason when we came to the United States that we arrived in the San Ynez Valley was because the big population, our uncles, my dad, they had already established themselves in this area. So this kind of became the area to go to when you left Los Guerrero.
Right. It was kind of like a home away from home, right? And it'd be interesting to find out who this one person who like settled here first and kind of started that chain.
Yeah, it would be very interesting to find out. I know that my mom talks about her grandma coming and working in Lombok and Guadalupe. She lost her husband at an early age, but she already had her children. So she was a widow, and she married her husband here in the United States, in Azusa, from what my mother shares. So we might have family in Azusa somewhere, from that side, and we don't know it. And so it would be interesting if we were to find out those family members, married there, went back to live to Mexico. She was, she had her children. Her husband passed away, and she would come to the United States as a farm worker. And she would work in Guadalupe, and she would work in this area in Santa Maria as a farm worker. And so she would provide for her family that way. And so we also have history of mi Papa Toño, who would come as a bracero, who came in that time frame, and who was able to work in different parts to be able to provide for his family. So it will be interesting to see if we go back, right? ¿Quién fue la primera persona que salió de Los Guerrero and came to the United States? So if anyone knows,
Yes.
it would be interesting to trace back. We have gone back and reviewed, the history behind our ancestors and those who came before us, and having now the opportunity to come to the United States with Los Papeles, that meant there was less sacrifice, and it was another formal way. Of course, there was a process to go through that with the citas a Juárez and gathering all the documents you needed, and you also had to provide physicals, but you had to have all your vaccines or up-to-date medical records to be able to have granted that opportunity.
Getting Los Papeles was a life-changing experience, and something that we're very grateful for, because it has opened a lot of opportunities for myself and my siblings and my parents. But it's also to say that, if my dad had applied and we hadn't gotten papeles, there's a lot of hardworking people in Los Guerrero, and I feel like we could have made it work as well. We could have, tried different things. We like to think of it as like it was part of Diosito's plan for opening doors, especially for my sister, I think, for Dulce, and giving her opportunities that weren't that easily available back then in our little town.
There's a lot of professionals in Los Guerrero who have made it work in Mexico. They're hardworking people. They are very culturally rich. There's a lot of culturally rich activities, costumbres, festivales, fiestas in Diciembre. And, that community is beautiful. I am very proud to say I'm from Los Guerrero, and that I was actually born in my house in Los Guerrero, thanks to my mom.
Yeah.
I am a native, from Los Guerrero. I was born in that house, in my parents' first home, the one that my dad worked so hard to build. When he came here, and he would send money back to Mexico. My grandma took good care of his money, and he saved it. Mi Mama Chuy, man, descanse, Mama Chuy. She did an awesome job saving the money for him to build his first home. So when my mom and my dad got married, thanks to his hard work and mi Mama Chuy's good administration of his money, he was able to have his first casita and build it on his own. And that was the place where they built their family, su hogar. And it's not longer there. La casita, it was torn down. They renovated. But I still remember the memories that I had before coming to the United States in la casa. And it's funny, and I'm going to laugh a little. I'm going to tell a little story, if that's okay, about las húngaras. So, house in Los Guerrero is really close to la primaria. It's like walking distance, like a few.
To the school, yeah.
Yeah, the school is really close. And it was so funny because I remember that las húngaras, how they would describe them, and they used them as like to put fear on us a little bit, las húngaras andan. So, they would say, las húngaras están aquí, te van a llevar, they're going to take you. And we connotated las húngaras to be like with circus people, kind of like they would take you and, they would go from town to town. And so I remember this story, and shout out to my generation of my classmates de Los Guerreros. Saludos a todos. Ustedes saben quién son, de mi generación, y que mis primos and they were kind of the generation, mis primas. And I remember que decían, oh, andan las húngaras. So we were like scared. We were like, oh man, las húngaras. And I remember one day we formed a plan. We're like, there's 5 of us or whatever number of us was at that time. And we're like, okay, so what is the best way to get home? Okay, we're going to form like a little cadenita and we're going to drop off the first person who lives closer to here. And then the next person will drop off the next, the little group will drop off the next person and kind of like trickle down until there was the one last person. And we're like, well, what is the last person going to do? ¿Qué va a hacer? Pues le va a correr su casa. Once you drop off the second to last person, le corres a tu casa. So we kind of like made that plan one day. Yeah. And the thing was, they dropped me off, and guess who wasn't home?
My parents.
My parents weren't home. And so what did I do? Well, I got I went into my house, like on the side, there was a little puerta ahí. Entré, I entered, and there was nobody home. So I freaked out. I was like freaking out. I was like, my parents aren't home. But where was my second safest place for me?
Your grandparents' house?
My grandparents' house. So I ran into my Mama Gracia's house. And I was like, Mama Gracia, my parents are home. Y andan las húngaras, And, like, she hosted me there, because I was like, I was scared. I was scared that, I was going to be home and las húngaras were going to get there and I'm never going to see my parents again. So those are kind of some stories that as a child, and the reason I brought it up is these are the things that I grew up with. Here in the U.S., you don't hear about the húngaras. What are the húngaras, In Mexico, these are things that you hear. El cucuy, la llorona, las húngaras, kind of those like La Cueva de Chávez. Those are kind of some like folk stories, I guess. That's what you can call them, that were told. And as a child, you grew up with those stories.
Yeah.
And so that was very interesting to that transition here where you're like, aquí it's different. Like allá, you hear all these things about the susto. But here in the United States, unless you're with your family and you talk about them, you don't hear it anywhere else. Unless you talk to someone who's from Mexico and you're sharing common stories.
Yeah, that you can relate and they know what you're talking about kind of thing.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And then, so kind of just to end the backstory of how we came. So it sounds like we got the papeles. We ended up going to the citas, so the appointments. And then an interesting fact too, in the video that my Coma Diana beautifully made of our trailer or intro, there's pictures of me very young and there's pictures of mi Coma Diana very young. And those are actually the pictures from our first passport. We flew from Mexico to Tijuana when we arrived, and then from Tijuana we took a bus to, I would assume maybe Santa Ynez. You remember, Coma, where?
I don't know if it was Santa Maria, but I do remember that after we received our green card, that we didn't leave Los Guerrero right away. We probably stayed there a couple months. I imagine my parents were arranging stuff for us, where we're going to come to, who was going to host us, leaving arrangements and all that, which required some planning. Maybe they had some ahorritos por ahí, or maybe they had to borrow money. That's how a lot of people did it, borrow money and, we'll pay you, when we find a job and we can get back on our feet. And yeah, I remember we flew, and that was the first time flying too. Talking about getting out of that comfort zone of Los Guerrero, el municipio de San Martín, and actually flying. That was our first time flying in an airplane from Guadalajara to Tijuana, and then catching a bus from, I imagine, San Diego all the way to, I think, Santa Maria area where they would, the Greyhound. It was probably the Greyhound.
Yeah. And see, I was very young, so I don't have a lot of recollection of this as much as you do. So I appreciate your perspective, Coma. If I remember anything, I just remember coming on a bus, all kind of a dream for me. Like I don't have very detailed memory of it, but I do remember a bus. And I guess for me as a 3-year-old, like that was a big thing, like buses, you know?
Yeah, for
Mm,
me, what I recall is the bus depot, the place where
mm-hmm.
you catch the bus. And I remember, getting off of the airplane and, being at the bus depot. And I remember, when you're a little kid, you're bothering your parents. The bus depot had like a little, I want to say a little store in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I remember bothering, I think, quiero, yo quiero, right? I want
Yeah.
my snack. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember this gentleman, maybe he either was tired of hearing us or he was just being so kind that he gave us dollars. He gave us complete stranger gave us some dollars. Maybe that,
Mm-hmm.
like my parents, I don't know, might not be able to afford, or maybe he was like, man, I just want this kid to get their stuff so they don't bother anymore.
Yeah.
But I remember receiving $1, and to me, like it showed, um, like the kind-heartedness of the welcoming to the United States, because that bus depot was probably in San Diego area,
Mm-hmm.
and a complete stranger offering random kids some money, right? Obviously, my parents were there, right? And I feel like it was like a welcoming act of kindness, of all
Mm-hmm.
the kindness of people who have helped us along the way, strangers
Mm-hmm.
who have lent their hands to help us, who open their doors for us to
Mm-hmm.
come here, because we did come into mi tío Yello's home at that time. And so he
Mm-hmm.
was our welcoming hand to the United States when we arrived here in the San Ynez Valley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we'll talk more about, all the people that have offered a helping hand to us and welcomed us to the country. We'd like to have my mom on the podcast as well and interview her experience of, coming to the US and having a daughter with special needs and kind of all the helping hands that were lent out to her as well. You mentioned the mi tío Yayo, mi tía Ina opening their home to us and letting us stay. In the meantime, that my parents were able to kind of look for a place for us. And I don't know if you wanted to share about your experience there, or we can save it for another episode, whatever you'd like.
We had a great experience. They were very kind to us and helpful. And I think we can save the longer stories for another episode, but just wanted to share that, we are grateful that they opened their doors. It was a
Mm-hmm.
small home, but they made it work with us. And, it was just a learning experience. Their home was at a ranch, so it wasn't a city setting. It was more of a ranch setting. And I think that helped, the nature, the walks, the horses, there is where we learn how to ride our bikes and things like that. It kind of made it a setting where we could. It wasn't, like we came from Los Guerrero, dirt roads, and we have cows and we have other animals, horses, and then we come to a ranch. So it made that transition in a way a little bit easier because we weren't in an apartment building, right? We were kind of like in a place where we could, ride our bikes. And, once we learned how to ride our bikes, we rode our bikes and we would play
Mm-hmm.
outside and we could be able to run freely. And that changed, obviously, when we moved into an apartment building. And we'll talk about further about that. But just the fact that they welcomed us into their small home and they didn't say no to that. Because
Mm-hmm.
here were like 6 people coming into their home, kids and my mom and
with
my
with
dad.
young with young kids from the ages of, how old were you, Como? You were
8.
8 to Dulce, so she was probably, if I was 3, she was probably like 1. So
Mhm.
from, those ages. Yeah. It's a lot of
So
kids.
we're very grateful.
Yes, yes, very grateful. All right, well, I know la plática está buena, the talk is good, and the stories are good. We'll leave the rest for the next episode. So again, we really appreciate everyone's excitement and support as we kind of navigate this podcast and figure out how to put it out to you guys and everything. But thank you so much for your support. And again, just a reminder, new episodes are set to come out every Wednesday, right, Coma?
Every Wednesday. And also, don't forget to follow us on our social media, en nuestras redes sociales, on Facebook and Instagram. On Facebook, you can find us as Mija, Let Me Tell You. And on Instagram, Coma, how can they find us?
Yes, Mija, Let Me Tell You, with underscores between the words. And as well on YouTube, I know a couple of you have mentioned that you would like for it to be translated into Spanish so that you're able to put captions in Spanish. And I know we've mentioned about maybe doing like a video option as well. We're in the works of trying to figure those out. So we appreciate your patience.
Thank you for your patience. We do live in different cities, so we are Zooming right now, and we are trying to figure out a way for us to be able to record these podcasts.
Yes, and we've really been enjoying it, and we really hope that y'all continue to tune in and give us feedback, give us comments, give us topics you would like to hear about, and share your own story, share your experiences and what you recall and how it relates to ours.
Share where you come from. Share where your family comes from in the comments. We want to hear where your origin story or your family's origin story is from. So we would love to hear that too.
Yes, definitely. And like we said, we'd love to share more stories of other first-generation immigrants as well, and we'd love to hear from you. Just for now, that is all. Coma, any parting words?
My heart is very grateful and full for all the wonderful support that we've been getting.
Thank you so much. And we'll see you next Wednesday for our next episode. Keep an eye out on the social media for when they drop. And con gratitud, this is Mija, Let Me Tell You.